Good afternoon. I'll give everyone a second to come and join our webinar. So thanks for taking the time this afternoon and coming and joining us. I might introduce myself in the meantime. My name is Abhinaya Rajvelu, or short for Abby. I'm an associate director at Cred Consulting in Sydney, and I have the pleasure of facilitating this wonderful panel today. I'm joining from Gadigal country. I would like to extend my respect to our First Nations elders and past and present, and warmly welcome any First Peoples who are joining us today. We are going to talk about a topic that I deeply, deeply care about today, which is creating communities for all or just more houses. This is part of Cred Consulting's free series called Creducation, where we join our friends and colleagues, some of us here with us today, to share our knowledge and ideas. There's a lot of talk in the industry. You all know just as well as I do that there's such a really great need for more housing and a push across the industry to fast track medium and high density apartments and housing. And this is a second where we need to take a moment and think about we have to do things correctly and a bit differently to ensure we deliver quality outcomes for everyone. Planning as a discipline, as an industry, is about delivering public good and public benefit. But we are seeing increasingly that planning is becoming primarily dwellings or housing targets driven and not really about the people who are going to be living in our places. So that's where we come in. So we're going to step in, and today we're going to dig a bit deeper. We're going to go beyond the numbers and talk about what this means for the people who will live in our growing areas. How do dwellings translate into people? Who are these people likely to be? What will they need in terms of housing quality and diversity, and most importantly, social infrastructure? How can we consider these needs early in the planning, design, and delivery process and embed them as essential things, not just as nice to haves, so our communities and places can be healthy, connected, and livable in the future? I hope all of you are as nerdy as I am, because I'm very excited to have this chat with our wonderful panel members today. I'm joined by four industry experts. Firstly, Ninad Petrovic, Senior Demographic Consultant at .id Informed Decisions. Ninad, if you can give a wave to everybody. Ninad has worked in population analysis and forecasting for over 12 years and brings a wealth of experience in how our communities are growing and changing. Julia Miller-Randall is a director at Cred Consulting in Brisbane. She has over 20 years of experience in strategic and social planning. Excitingly, Julia won the PIA 2024 Outstanding Women in Planning Award in Queensland. Sarah Riley is the managing director of Cred. She is an industry leader in community planning, strategy, and policy. She has decades of experience in providing social infrastructure and community benefits advice to state government, local government, and private sector. Sarah also won the PIA Outstanding Women in Planning Award in New South Wales. Frankie Layson is the Director of Urban Design at SJB. Frankie has over 15 years of experience and a breadth of skills and experience, especially in master planning for complex growth areas, something that we're going to be unpacking today. Before I throw to the panelists, I'd like to go over some housekeeping. If you can all see in your webinar box, there's a Q&A button in the bottom, and that's what we're going to be using to collect questions from all of you today. So today is not just a chance for you to hear from all of these industry experts, but an opportunity to submit questions so we can all chat to you and the panelists can answer your questions. So only if you submit your questions through the box, we can see it and I can direct it to the panelists. Feel free to use the chat button, which is casual, to introduce yourselves or chat to everybody in the room. But please remember that it is a public forum, so I request all of you to be respectful of every participant here today. This session is also being recorded and made available to all participants here today, but we'll also be sharing that on the Cred website. So if you want to come back to this fantastic conversation, it'll be embedded in time. And without further ado, because I know we're all very keen to get stuck in, Ninad, I might throw to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Nenad Petrovic, and I work down here in Melbourne at ID. I'm a senior demographic consultant. I've been in this role for 13 years and spent 8 of them working as a population forecaster, a role that took me across Australia and New Zealand and made me really realize how different types of places function differently and how any sort of planning or provision of services always needs to have the current and future population characteristics in mind. So first, if you don't mind going to the next slide, Abby, Phoebe. I'll just cover some of Australia's big picture population and housing trends, for getting into talking about how different populations are in different parts of our cities and communities. So these figures are kind of hot off the press, came out last week, and we see that Australia's population as at September 2023 was 26.8 million. So Australia is growing at a rate of about 1% per annum in the years before 2020. And even in 2020, with COVID-19 affecting part of that financial year, we still grew at 1.2%. So after about 2 years of minimal growth, we're back to 2.5% growth in the year to September 2023. Now, as our population ticks over in terms of millions, we reach the next million in less time as migration drives our population growth. And it looks as if what we missed out, if you see that dip on the chart, what we missed out in 2020 and 2021 in terms of continuing that trend, we're making up for in 2023 and 2024. Next slide, please, Phoebe. So net overseas migration in the year to September 2023 was 548,000 people. And even on that chart, you can see that that actually outstrips anything that we've seen in the past. Now, whether this is a longer term trend or a post-COVID catch-up is yet to be determined. At ID, we anticipate that Australia's population will grow to 30 million by 2033 and to 33 million by 2041. Top growing states are Victoria, followed by New South Wales, Queensland, and Western Australia. But those are just big numbers. So as net overseas migration makes up 80% of population growth, it's important to understand the characteristics of these new migrants. And if you're in the business of community design for better livability, health, resilience, etc., this sort of information will help you understand their community infrastructure and service needs. The risk of not doing that and not taking demographics into consideration are poorly planned communities in growth areas with no social infrastructure, not enough social infrastructure, and poorly designed and planned high density precincts in our inner cities, or perhaps even neighbourhoods where dwellings and the pursuit of dwelling targets has taken all the focus away from quality, livable community design. So back to the characteristics of our recent migrants. 19% of arrivals were born in India, 11% in China, 6% in Nepal, and 5% in the Philippines. The median age of recent arrivals to Australia is 28.2 years. So that's compared to 38 years for Australia as a whole. So they're much younger people. Most of them live as families with children, 53% compared to 40% of our entire population. And 79% of recent arrivals participate in the labour force, compared to the national average of 61%. Now, this, of course, relates both to their age structure, but also to the economic pool and Australian employment opportunities for migrants and the skilled migrant visa streams. Yeah. Next slide, please. In terms of dwelling and housing, what we've noticed in the 5 years to 2021 at the last census, 893,000 new standalone houses were built. There were 325,000 medium density dwellings and 505, almost 506,000 high density dwellings built in Australia. In terms of the proportional makeup of all the dwelling stock in Australia, we're noticing that high density housing is increasing. It's growing in terms of its proportion of all dwellings. So it's increased by 4% in the 10 years to 2021. And even in regional Australia, the proportion of housing which is high density has increased over time, meaning that people have more dwelling stock, diversity, and more opportunities, and maybe even just the ability to live in different types of dwellings at different life stages, or just based on their circumstances and affordability limits. And our households are getting smaller too, aging having a part to play in that. And lastly, housing is unaffordable. So the median price of a house in Australia increased by 175% in the 10 years since 2013. Next slide, please. Now, it's important to understand that there are, I guess you could say, two main streams or types of recent arrivals who will have different housing and service needs in Australia. So we've got young blind persons, or the couple without children in the city, living people, and the young families with children. So those are two different groups which also tend to live in different parts of our cities too. The young lone person students or professionals who've come here from overseas, they tend to live in CBDs or close to educational institutions, in smaller, high density housing, whereas migrant families are more prominent either in cultural hubs within established parts of cities where cultural diversity is already high. And sometimes what happens is that they'll kind of settle in these first before finding their feet and buying or renting in new growth areas on the outskirts of cities. This group, the younger families, they're more likely to live in larger households, either because of the number of children present or because larger households are a more normal occurrence in their culture. So 26% of recent arrivals in house, sorry, 26% of recent arrivals live in households with 5 or more people in them, compared to only 9% of Australia as a whole. Next slide, please. And when planning for communities, you need to understand them. So I'll use two examples of growth areas here. One is the growth greenfield area in Camden, in New South Wales, out of Western Sydney, called Oran Park, which grew by 360% since 2016. And the other, Green Square, is the inner southern locality in the city of Sydney, which grew by 31% since 2016, but 214% since 2011. But they grew and populated and I guess shaped themselves in different ways. Both areas recorded a lot of residential activity during this period, and they do have quite different populations. So in these two areas, even if you have a look at their close median age, Oran Park 30 years, Green Square 31, it doesn't really tell you about the different age structures of the two suburbs. So for Oran Park, the median age is low because there are so many children. In Green Square, it's because there are actually a lot of people in that 20 to 34-year cohort, so almost 52% of the population in that cohort, that reach that median age. So it's understanding who lives in what areas and sometimes even digging beyond the headline numbers. The areas have different cultural diversity and even different household compositions. If you could go to the next slide, please. Different household compositions and different housing tenure. So planning services with all of these in mind is quite important. If you go to look at this, one more slide after this, that just describes labour force participation. And that's not a mistake, actually. The median household incomes are identical to the dollar, which is another interesting thing that, what's made up of that? Where do those people work? What kind of industries? Which kind of occupations? And next slide, please. So just before I finish up, I guess I'll go through some tips from an expert of understanding populations. And I guess if you want to understand different populations in different parts of where you might be working, some things to just start on. So don't be afraid of data. There are many ways to access basic highlight demographic information, which could tell you a lot about a place and at least kind of focus your attention in the right way, and about how it's been changing. So at ID, we've got, I'm not sure, some of you might have used our community profile tools that we create for local government. They, for example, have got a great population highlight section for that purpose, of providing some headline statistics, showing how they've changed over time, benchmarked to your region or greater capital city. When we undertake analyses of places, we also try to understand what the role and function of the place is. So what purpose does it serve? Why do people live here? Why do people move here? Thirdly, understand change over time. So places change. And while knowing what a place looks like right now, it's worth understanding where it stands in terms of its suburb life cycle. Is this a young family area which will one day have those kids leave home and become an empty nester suburb and therefore have completely different community infrastructure or service needs? Or is it an empty nester area which is slowly starting to kind of regenerate and return to becoming a young couples with family suburb? And what impact will that have on the needs of the residents now and in the future? Also, use population forecasts. Use them to understand rates of expected growth, but also the changes in the population from an age structure perspective. This will tell you about what kind of services are needed here in the area in the future based on forecasts. And lastly, and not this some sort of a soft sales slide, but I thought I'd include a few links here. Now, we at ID, we've got a lot of Australia covered in terms of community profile, economic profile tools, housing monitors, population forecasts, and even the understanding of community sentiment from a service need perspective through the Views platform. We also have vast expertise in these areas for bespoke projects. So please, when you receive the slide back, check out some of these links, which will point you into the direction to begin using demographic and population and socioeconomic information in your work today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nanette, and great segue to Julia.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I am a fellow planning nerd, Abby, and I could absolutely listen to those interesting population and demographic insights all day, Nanette. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. If you can just go to the next slide, Phoebe. As part of this webinar today and in thinking about how we approach it, now that you've heard all of that information from Nanette about what Australia's population looks like, I just wanted you to actually look at people's faces. And it was very deliberate that I actually put this slide here with photos of people and their beautiful diversity. When we're thinking about planning for housing growth, we're thinking about housing targets. At the end of the day, we're actually planning for homes for these people, for these really diverse people who have really different needs. So we have people with disability, we have families, we have lone person households, we have people who come to Australia from different countries and can speak different languages and may not always be proficient in English. We have single parent households, we have group households, we have people that have lived in an area for a really long time and have really strong connections to that place, and we have newcomers to suburbs. What these different people need and the houses that they require and the neighbourhoods that they live in all look a little bit different, and everyone needs something a bit different, and everyone prioritises something a bit different, whether it's access to our outdoor areas, the number of bedrooms, access to transport, facility services. I think it's really just important to, in the beginning, just acknowledge that diversity and the humans that sit behind the numbers that we're planning to. Phoebe, if you go to the next slide. The other thing that I think is a really important part of this discussion is the absolute importance of engaging with community and industry. One of the aspects of my job that I love the most is that I get to talk to all different kinds of people to understand the experiences of where they live and their aspirations for the future. And while population and demographic data is absolutely fundamental to planning that we do, I would say that engagement is such an important input to understand that lived experience and to understand, I guess, how these trends and how these experiences actually play out on the ground and in real life. These are some quotes from some various housing-related projects that we've undertaken over the years and some direct things that we've heard from our communities, which I think really do help to shed a light on, I guess, the nuance that's required in planning for future growth and planning for future change. One of the discussions that I really enjoyed facilitating was with this person who lives with disability, who explained to us in our focus group about how they live in a place where, under the planning scheme, they don't actually encourage smaller households, they don't really encourage units, but she lived in a unit that was quite close to a rural area. And that was absolutely perfect for her and her needs. She lives with autism, and really what is so important to her is to be able to have that opportunity to walk out, be out in open space, be outdoors and experience nature. And that is so important for her day-to-day functioning. And that's absolutely something that we need to keep in mind when we're planning for new communities, and I guess the different needs of different people. I think that another quote in there that really spoke to me as well was an older resident who spoke to about having really deep connections to the neighbourhood that they live in, but not having that ability to be able to downsize and keep living in the same neighbourhood because she didn't have housing choice. There weren't really units, there weren't townhouses available, and so she sort of felt a little bit trapped. Again, I think this kind of speaks to when we're planning for growth and change, in the developments that we're delivering, who are we providing for and which communities are we serving, but also who's missing out. And I think these are just important things that we sort of start to uncover and explore a bit more as planners in this really important era that we're in at the moment. If you can go to the next slide, Phoebe. Something that we absolutely know is that where we live and how we live impacts so many aspects of our lives, whether it's how we get around, how we participate in community life, if we participate in community life, our mental and physical health and well-being. It can even influence where we go to work or even our educational opportunities. We know that with the population growth that Ninad spoke to us about and explained, that there are going to be a variety of different housing needs and requirements in the future, and that we really need to be planning for a range of different housing responses to respond to our diverse community and those diverse needs. I think many of us have probably had experiences where we've gone through a new greenfield community and seen dwellings that really all look the same and provide the same 4 bedrooms on a 405 square metre lot. Or we look at a new high-rise development that goes in and, it just provides 1 or 2 bedrooms in the apartments that are provided there. As we're tackling this housing crisis, as we're thinking about how we address these dwelling targets that are being imposed on local governments right across Australia, the concepts of housing choice, housing diversity, and responding to community need absolutely need to sit alongside and enrich our responses to how we deal with these challenges and this era that we're in. Just the final slide from me. I've become very philosophical as I've been thinking about this webinar and what I wanted to say and what I wanted to prompt a conversation about. And I think what I've really been pondering is, I guess, the role of the planning system and I guess the way that we're currently operating as an industry at a time where we are facing increased housing unaffordability, housing shortages, increased loneliness, all these really serious social and economic drivers. And I think so much of our planning system at the moment is really geared towards measuring and assessing impacts as opposed to really reframing things around, I guess, how we can deliver community benefit and respond to need. I feel like we talk so much about building height and articulation and the number of car parks. It's always about the number of car parks, which are absolutely important things for us to consider in city making and city shaping. But I think, again, it just has to be nuanced with understanding the communities that we're planning for and the places that we're creating as a result of it. So I'm really interested to talk further with people and kind of continue this narrative, thinking about the opportunities for strategic policy and planning to really drive better outcomes, how we can rethink development application processes and the evidence that we provide people, even the skills that we provide our planners with to tackle these wicked problems that we face in our cities, and also how we can, engage more meaningfully and collaborate better across industry and community and with decision makers as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you all today.
Thank you, Julia. I can talk philosophical, intellectual thinking about planning for forever and ever. And I think Sarah is going to bring it back to tangible outcomes and things we can and should do. And a reminder to everybody in the room, if you have any questions for our panelists, please continue to post them in our Q&A box. So at the end of Sarah and Frankie's presentation, we can take them. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Abby. Yep, it's a great opportunity to pick our brains. Collectively, we have, gosh, over 40 or 50 years of experience. So lots of lessons to be learned from the work we've done. I'm just listening to everyone today and I'm thinking maybe that we're in the midst of a housing affordability crisis. And perhaps it's time for us all to take a little breath and start from first principles and evidence-based need and how we're planning our cities and communities, thinking about the types of places and communities we want to create first and how our housing targets fit into those places and not the other way around. So I'm just going to take us through a little talk about social assets, why they're so important and what we might be able to do differently. Phoebe, next slide, please. More housing can't be at the expense of all of us. We do need more affordable housing. We need all different types of housing typologies, as we've heard. But if we're not thinking about the places we're creating, the communities we're creating, we're also creating massive health, social well-being and economic impacts, not just at the individual level or the community level, but at our state agency and federal agency levels. Mental health issues are costing around $60 billion to our economy annually. Physical inactivity costs the economy around $15.6 billion annually. Heat waves cost Western Sydney businesses and communities about $1.4 billion annually. And a lot of these things could be resolved if we were planning inclusive, welcoming cities and places that have all the social assets, amenities that we need to live healthy, connected, well and happy lives. We also know that planning for these social assets delivers incredible benefits. There is so much evaluation and measurement that has been done around this. And sometimes it's a little bit frustrating that the social assets and the building of inclusive communities is not valued as highly as getting those houses in or those roads, for example. There is also a few challenges us as planners, particularly social planners, face, is that there really are a few policy levers that require social infrastructure. Social infrastructure plans are not necessarily required upfront. And it's really quite difficult when you're in a process and it gets to the end of it, that often the social infrastructure will drop off the plan because it's seen as the least important thing. But actually, if we look at the cost to our society and the benefits to our communities and our individuals and our health services and our policing services, it probably offers the most value. And often it's what holds the approval process up. You know, you do all this massive planning, you get to the end, and then the council says, well, where's my park? Where's my sports field? Where's my community centre? Where's my library? So I really want to talk to you about the benefits of why we should be planning upfront for social assets and social infrastructure and why we might want to flip the way we do things a little bit. Thanks, Phoebe. Social assets make us healthy and happy, but they really also enable our disaster resilience. We are facing more and more disasters in our community. In New South Wales, the disaster risk mitigation plan has just been released with a big focus on prevention, social cohesion, and the delivery of social assets. Social assets span across places that bond us together, where we can get to know each other and build relationships. They provide the places for us to build relationships across different groups. So to give us an uplift in life, and those kinds of places, you know, your local parks, your walkable streets where you can have incidental connections, places for community events and celebrations, our schools and childcare centres, sports spaces, etc. But they also link us to the services and opportunities we need, which is a really, really big part of feeling connected into communities. And we know that trust in government and sense of community connectedness is declining annually at the moment. And so our social assets are a really, really important part of the building blocks of good communities and good cities that will enable us to live healthy and happy lives, and are core parts of community resilience in the face of disasters. Thanks, Phoebe. So how does it all fit in? It's a complicated old world out there, the planning process, and Frankie's going to take you through that in more detail in a minute. But one of the things that we know is that there's really no requirement for a social infrastructure technical study or a community benefits technical study or a social needs technical study, many, many names, as an upfront required technical document to inform a master plan or a planning proposal and future DAs. And that's a real issue because if we're focusing on an impact assessment approach where those sorts of needs are evaluated at the end of a process, It's really, really hard to go back in and put your library in, a new park, once the profit or the feasibility has been assessed. So we've been really big advocates about changing that and flipping it a little bit to embed a community needs study or a social needs study or a community benefit study, whatever you want to call it, at the very beginning of a planning process. We start with these dwelling and population growth forecasts. Someone like Nanad comes in and does a fabulous population analysis and character analysis that then we can take and amongst another range of needs, including strategic drivers, participation trends, how other infrastructure is working. We can then provide a technical study that will inform master plans, local contribution plans, city and regional plans, and other documents. We know that many councils in particular are really challenged resource-wise, and when they get to that assessment process, having a document like this that shows that the master plan or planning proposal has responded to those needs really makes that assessment a whole lot easier. Thanks, Abby. Some things that we can do is we can plan collaboratively early. Another thing that I'm really noticing in the industry is that's not my responsibility, or we'll have to think about that later, or that's not essential. But all of these social infrastructure, or these social asset pieces that make up communities are the responsibility of different people and different agencies, from the state government to the local government to the private sector. And really the only way that we are going to make sure that we are getting the right assets in at the right place at the right time is through collaboration early on. Currently, there's a little bit of a schism between different agencies and what their responsibilities is, with so many people facing funding challenges. So early collaboration around how these essential pieces of social assets or social infrastructure fit into a master plan or planning proposal are really, really important. And for some of these social assets, they really are the responsibility of everybody. And I think we would agree that affordable housing, active transport, those blue and green grids, those walkable streets are really high priorities for our health and well-being, and must be considered early on in how we're planning our places. Thanks, Abby. And another aspect also is that we tend to plan based on sites. But a site sits within a precinct, which sits within a city, which sits within a state, etc. And what we need to be thinking about is how smaller sites might sit within bigger areas. And in terms of social infrastructure, we're not just planning for that site specifically. There are certain needs that a local small community might need, but there are going to be bigger needs as we have that cumulative impact of the growth. So when we have housing targets, for example, that we're being set that have lots of places next to each other with big population growth forecasts, that's going to indicate bigger district and regional infrastructure needs are going to be required. And that's when the state government jumps in and the local councils talk together, and we think about how we're going to think strategically across bigger precincts, not just individual sites. So, for example, one small site, location A, you can see here, might require some small infrastructure, but when you combine that with location B, then you're going to need bigger regional infrastructure. And one of the things we've really noticed in New South Wales in particular is that those bigger regional and district social assets are the ones being left a little bit behind, because we're constantly planning and reviewing based on sites. And I think that's an opportunity for us to change how we do things in the future too. Is that my last slide, Phoebe? It is. So I'm going to hand over to Frankie now, who's going to talk about how we've worked a bit together, haven't we, Frankie?
Yes.
To get better outcomes.
Can everyone hear me? It's all good, because I think I just had one of those chaos moments where I dropped out and all of a sudden my Zoom meeting closed and I'm back again. So hopefully it's all good.
Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you, or Frankie. Thank you. And a little reminder to everybody to continue to post questions in the chat. And back to you, Frankie.
Thank you. Yeah, so Sarah and I have been working for many years, and we are both really passionate about this subject. And we both have done a number of projects now where we can attest to having good information early, and the sort of the information that we get from the people that's just been presented can help us design with community in mind, and help us when we go through the rigmarole of justifying and all the measuring and getting whacked by a stick about, is this the right height? Is this the right FSR? We can also know that we've actually embedded community front and center, and we've planned for a precinct that is that takes in consideration all of the other key elements that actually make a place. So it's not just about the built form, and it's not just about the yield or the dwellings, but it is about the open space infrastructure. It's about the open space, and it's about all the other elements that make our cities great. Next slide. So this first diagram I'm going to talk through is just kind of like a really rough overview of the planning process and the opportunity when we can start to integrate and plan for community benefit. In the early phases, when you're doing master plans or planning proposals, which ultimately are changing the planning controls and you're drastically changing the community that is in a place, it is critical that we have this evidence, understanding the future community, understanding the needs of the community up front, so we know who we're planning for and we know the extent of change and impact. And what's critical, as Sarah mentioned, is it's beyond the site. It's not just the boundary that we're master planning within. We also need to know the impact, because people don't understand a site boundary. People understand the neighborhood or the suburb, and a community is so much more than just a boundary. And then once we go through that process and we're able to inform planning controls and embed in a community infrastructure strategy for a precinct, we're able then to provide council with a sort of roadmap or a guidebook of how, if they get DAs, what is then the community infrastructure that would be appropriate at the site level? Because ultimately, when a developer comes in, they're only really interested in their own site and what they can deliver. And usually, when you've got a well-informed council who have a really great infrastructure schedule or a DCP which clearly articulates what community infrastructure is important and where, it actually makes the process a whole lot simpler to get the building and the development across the line. So we've just got an example at St. Leonard South where the master plan was very specific about where community infrastructure needed to be delivered. The developer knew at the beginning what they had to deliver. It was factored into the development equation. And as they were going through the DA process, they found a challenge where the setbacks, the other planning controls, limited the ability to deliver the affordable housing. And there was an easy conversation with council to say, actually, if we adjust the setbacks here or there, we're not going to have a significant impact on the public domain, but we were able to then get a little bit more development to help pay for the community asset. And so the architects thought, okay, this is actually crazy how easy it is to negotiate some of these outcomes, which typically it's a hard and fast no. Computer says no, computer says no. But there was actually a conversation because there was greater benefit on the table for the community. Next slide. I'm going to talk more broadly, mainly about planning proposals and master plans, because this is where the significant opportunity to really embed community infrastructure early. And one of the reasons where where this has really played out is the Rose Peninsula, where we initially did the master plan for this area 20 years ago. And what you kind of see in the middle with the yellow, blue, green blocks is what the master plan was envisaged back then. And this is a classic example where there has been incremental change over time where sites slightly got larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. So 8 stories is now up to 48 stories. And that's over the 20-year time frame. And what happened over that time was all of that community infrastructure wasn't planned initially, and it was a very expensive retrofit. And what we have here is on the right-hand side is through negotiation of the developer, because obviously they're not just going to give things for free. There was negotiation with council who really knew what their community needed to come up with a strategy and solution, and it was sort of like a win-win situation. The developer got their upside what they wanted, and the council then got a world-class community benefit, or asset that they can give back to the community. And it's actually really fundamentally changed how this precinct is conceived today and the way that people value it. Next slide. Another one, so when we do planning proposals, which ultimately is an infill upzoning on an individual site, this is an example of a larger site, but the question that we always ask ourselves and our clients is, what is the public benefit? That's a key thing. We're not going to do a planning proposal because you need more money or you need more density or dwellings. There has to be an upside. There has to be benefit for the community. And so when we have these community needs assessments up front and early, it's an easy conversation with the client. You can just give it to them and they pick and choose. They can say, yep, happy, 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 happy. And then when you have that conversation with council, they have this evidence-based list of community benefit that can be embedded and designed for within the plan so that when it gets delivered, it is coordinated and it is fit for purpose for the future community. So this is an example where we quickly identified, okay, this is how much open space we needed. This is the sort of community purpose, the venues that would be ideal to be integrated in this master plan. If we can consider communal spaces on the podium, then it allows us to help design the planning controls to enable all of these things to be considered and facilitated. Next one. And then the last example that I'm going to probably talk through is when we are fundamentally changing the land use from what was employment to a new residential community. This is when it's most important, that because we are creating a new suburb, a new community, and a new precinct, that we need to really understand who's going to come here, how many people are going to come here, what is the impact, and how can we create good community. And we need to ensure that at first principles, we're embedding all of these key elements such as active transport movement, open space, a variety of land uses, and built form outcomes, and housing diversity, so a range of different housing types, to ensure that it can be delivered as the master plan evolves over time, because they don't happen overnight, they happen over a long time. So next slide, sorry. So this is another project where what we've done is we set up a series of structure plans in the master plan, and what we do is community benefit and transcends a lot of different aspects of the master plan. So it isn't just in a single plan that kind of says it's going to go here. It's also about the open space and the connections to the community facilities and how all the streets and spaces and networks work together to ensure that we can deliver a good community outcome. Next slide. So this is my slide, and this is probably it's not all doomsday, but effectively this diagram represents. We did a bit of a GIS exercise to understand the potential impact of the housing reform that has all been publicised and widely talked about in New South Wales. So what we've got in colour is the amount of uplift, or the land that is going to be affected by the proposed uplifts, which is only in draft. And I think what we wanted to do and what we wanted to understand is this is a significant amount of area. It's almost all of Sydney that's affected. And we need to ensure that as part of this conversation that we have community infrastructure front in mind. We need to understand what is the impact of the new community, how can we ensure that appropriate levels of services are delivered across this area, because housing affordability isn't just about the amount that you buy a house for, but it's also about the lifestyle that you have after. And it's about free access to good services, establishing good community, being able to go to work effectively and easily. And it's so much more than just my house or dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you, Frankie. You've brought it right back to we have to make communities for all, on not just houses. So thanks for speeding along. I know you had a lot to say. We have a lot of questions coming through the chat, which I'll also take, but if people could just kindly submit your questions through the Q&A, that would be great. There's one question that I'll throw in the Q&A here to Julia and Sarah. How important do you think social housing is to ensure diverse communities? How do we ensure that this provision is provided for them?
Do you want me to jump in quickly, Julia?
Yeah, you go first.
It's absolutely essential. You know, less than 50% of the Australian population will be able to afford a mortgage or be able to get a mortgage for any of the housing that we're planning at the moment, which will be mostly private delivery and investor owned. That also means that probably more than 50% of people won't be able to afford the rents on those houses as well. We have lots of workers, key workers, who are sleeping in their cars overnight between shifts because it's too long for them to get home from where they live to their jobs in inner city areas. Every other country in the world acknowledges this. So social housing is absolutely important to diverse communities, and it creates a much more sustainable place to have different kinds of people living there. How do we ensure this provision for them? I don't know. We've got a lot of state government land. Perhaps we start prioritising delivery of social housing and affordable housing on that land. And also, I think it's also through better partnerships with the private sector. Julia?
Yeah, I mean, right on. I completely agree that social housing is absolutely fundamental to the planning of our cities and neighbourhoods. Ninad, was it you that said it was 175% growth in the average house price in Australia in the last 10 years?
Something scary like that.
Which, I mean, I know that my wage hasn't grown by 175% during that time. So I think I'd say, you know, I think a lot of the trouble that we're finding ourselves in with our housing market at the moment is because we stopped prioritising social housing in the same way, and we really took our foot off the accelerator right across Australia. So I think it's absolutely important in terms of how do we deliver it. Exactly what Sarah said. I live in Brisbane, where we don't have inclusionary zoning. That's something I'd love to see. I think that the data shows us that it works. And, you know, I think there's a role for a lot of different players to play. You know, it's not just state government, it's It's federal government providing that funding. It's local government looking at some of their assets and opportunities with renewal. Yeah, there's a lot. Even private, our private developers and industry also looking at their, getting on board with some of these proposals as well.
Thanks, Julia. Ninad, is there anything from a community demographic analysis perspective that you can add from an affordable housing perspective?
We're actually doing a lot of work on key worker housing affordability at the moment too. And it's just finding that people are either willingly going into housing stress in order to maintain living close to their places of work or hubs of where employment for that particular industry that they specialize in is available. No, not just that. It's something that's just being squeezed from all angles. And I saw that there was another question there coming in about who is responsible for kind of ensuring that development of housing is not just done for profit and for the bottom line. Many answers, but I don't know who will take it on. Yeah.
The people who set the planning controls have a little bit of power.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Ninad. Frankie, I'm going to throw this question to you. And Sarah, Sarah said, it's very nice to hear your voice. I think so too.
Hi.
What are both of your thoughts about medium density and why land amalgamation is not supported seriously by government? Research has proved that medium density is environmentally, economically, socially, and culturally more preferable to community. Even maintaining such developments are easier than extreme high rises, which go over 6 stories. So Frankie, from your experience, is there something you'd like to talk to this?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is the definition of medium density. Is that terraces and is that 3-story walk-ups, or is that now 4 to 6 stories, which is kind of what's changed through the new reforms? And I definitely agree that it's seen that there's benefit, even in our inner city suburbs where you've got a lot of medium density, creating that density, where we're able to create that vibrancy. It is a good outcome. But the challenges have been for a very long time, in New South Wales at least, that stuff is just not affordable, and it's not, it's expensive to deliver, and it's not feasible, sorry, is what I meant to say. And so there hasn't been a lot of appetite for people to take the risk, amalgamate large houses, and then develop little houses, which are probably going to get you the same price as what you bought the houses for. So the development equation for a very long time has been a challenge to that. But I think the opening up that bandwidth of what medium density is to the 3 to 4 stories has been, I think, a potential positive change, because you're going to get that lower scale, higher density product, which can enable and foster good community, because you do have not so many people in the one building. And I think that might potentially change the development equation. So I think that definitely there is some good advantage, but I think we just need to look at that definition of what medium housing or density is.
Thanks, Frankie. Anything you'd like to add to that, Sarah?
Just that, any density can be good as long as it's being delivered for the right reasons. And I think it goes back to, are we planning strategically for the kinds of places and communities we want and the housing that will fit within those places? Or are we just delivering houses because we want more houses and not actually requiring the benefit that it can deliver? So, if you wanted a really tall, high density building with, 400 apartments in it, you'd want to be making sure that you're getting a trade-off for that, as Frankie talked about, through a much bigger regional open space at the ground level, or a big pool, or things like that lots more people can enjoy. And I don't necessarily think that's what we're getting through some of the taller, high-rise, high-density apartments, unfortunately. And there is lots of research array about, people talking to their neighbours and all those sorts of things that happen in a more lower height building. But I think anything can be done well, if there is the will to do it that way. If you look at places like Singapore with lots of really tall buildings, they also have incredible void decks full of green spaces. And, Copenhagen, they have hallways that people have to walk past each other and say hello. They also don't have all of the apartments owned by, strata or investors. There's more opportunity for that community creation. But I think, again, it's starting from, think about what we want in our places and then think about the housing that fits for those people.
Well said, Sarah. I think we're as a planning system also stuck between that what we've set as regulation and what we want as a result of this, and not being able to deliver either in between. Maria has posed a really interesting question that I know we all talk about all the time. The question is, Mario is wondering how you balance the needs of the community as defined by current data versus the expected demographic change for the community in the future. For instance, a young demographic like that of Green Square will eventually have kids, and some of them may want to stay in their current place. So, how do we balance provision of infrastructure for current needs versus future needs? Julia. Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry, is it?
It had to be one.
Is it? You have to have one every meeting.
Yeah.
Someone has to unmute themselves. It's me today. Listen, I would say this is something that we talk about all the time as social planners, and I think the big thing and the big trend and the big I guess design response that we're often looking for is just flexibility and adaptability in design. There is the ability, I know we're doing a lot of work in Victoria at the moment where they're building new community centres in communities where there are a high proportion of children, specifically, I guess, kindergarten age children, but they're designing those kindergarten rooms so that while they're trying to deal with this, I guess, high demand that they're experiencing in some of those new suburbs, that those kindergarten rooms can be repurposed, redesigned, and I guess refit out to be flexible multi-purpose rooms where you can undertake a range of different activities. So I think it really comes back to clever design. I think it comes back to monitoring population growth and change and service demand, understanding who your community is and checking in on that frequently. And yeah, I guess just continuing to build that evidence base, but good design and good planning.
Would you say also some places like Green Square, they kind of serve a particular role and function of having that kind of housing there for the people who live there, being close to a large employment hub, areas of education hubs and so on. So some people may change their behavior and maybe raise a family in smaller housing, but if we had a look at the migration statistics from Green Square in the last 10 years, you'd find that people at that life stage of having children do tend to kind of just move out and look for the more traditional house. Now, that could be a reason for both, because that's what they want, but also it could be because you're right, there might not be that kind of opportunity close to where they may have already laid their roots.
But Nanad, can I just add, you probably are finding a trend also that as we have more culturally diverse people moving into these apartments, that actually it's pretty normal to raise your kids in the apartments and not moving out as much either. Is that something you've seen? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I've got an anecdotal story to add this. On the weekend, we have friends that live in Green Square, and they said, "You see, all the other parents have 2 kids in a 2-bedroom. We'll make it work."
Yeah.
So I think people are, because of and the love that you have for the area that you grew up, people are starting to really knuckle down. And Green Square is an interesting place because there has been so much investment in infrastructure by the City of Sydney over the last years. It's completely different to what it was, and everyone loves every inch of it.
Yeah, it's true. It's got incredible social infrastructure, and it was planned collaboratively and master planned across all landowners. Yeah.
Proactive planning delivers good outcomes. Thanks, panel. There's lots of saucy questions in the panel. I'm loving it, but one of which here is the development industry seems to only be interested in maximizing short-term profit. Is it time for government to be a major player in the development industry to ensure proper long-term planning and ensure facilities for people and not profits?
Frankie.
Happy for any of you to take.
All our clients generally are motivated that way, and I think it's silly to think they're not going to be. But I do think there is a role for the government to have a greater role for the government to be involved in this. You see other cities like Singapore where housing is delivered by government, and there's a lot, and it's that great dense city with all the great outcomes that Sarah mentioned. I think we just need to be more clever about how we can get more out of the developers and embed things into policy to ensure that we can get the outcomes that we need.
It's definitely time for government to be more proactive. I agree.
Yeah.
There's a role for everybody. It can't just be delivered through the private sector like any service or community outcome.
Thanks, Sarah. Nina, this must be a question for you. What is the consideration from looking at everything we're talking about from an alternate view? We want more houses do we want more houses in unaffordable areas? How much consideration has there been around the inverse, example, providing employment services amenity where housing is more affordable, for example, in regional areas? Well, happy for you, Julia or Sarah, to jump in.
Good question. I don't have my urban economist colleague here, but I know that that's been thrown around at state government level and even at even the regional centres themselves, trying to attract jobs and population there because they do have that, I guess, competitive advantage of more affordable housing. I don't know how hard it is to pull things from that angle. I know that what has happened in COVID that's been accelerated is that because the dynamics of work have changed, that people could work remotely. People have used that as an opportunity to skip out into the more affordable areas. So that in a way has moved them and their household and I guess their incomes and their levels of disposable income to these regions, which is also, wreak havoc on the affordability there for the locals, but that's a different story. I mean, that's a great approach and an idea, but I just don't know. Maybe someone else can add what the not success rate, but I guess the success of that is.
Frankie, would it, does it go back to if we're depending on the private sector to deliver, they're going to look where the feasibility is, or
yeah. Yeah, I think there is an element of that.
I think it's a really spicy question. It's interesting because even I'm thinking about, something like, I state I'm from Queensland, and we have a very thriving resources industry. We have a lot of jobs in regional and remote areas, but a lot of those jobs are filled by a non-permanent workforce. So those FIFO workers that come in and out largely do not live in community, will often live on workers' camps. There's been lots of policy shift and lots of change over the years around, I guess, how you respond to that. But I guess I'm just saying, that's an example of when you provide the jobs, but the housing doesn't necessarily follow either. So I think that, there's no silver bullet with any of this kind of stuff. And there's a lot to balance and weigh up in all of it.
Yeah, so true. I think everything is so nuanced. You go, Frankie.
I was going to think, I think we have to kind of spread the density everywhere, and everyone needs to do the heavy lifting together. And we also need to prioritize areas where there is good amenity to begin with, because that can potentially handle it. But also understand that even if they do have amenity, that amenity needs to be improved with the density that comes with it. So I think there's an element of you do have to bring more housing to across the spectrum, and you can't just throw it out to the greenfields, because that's not a good solution either.
Yeah. Thanks, Frankie. And I know we only have 2 minutes left, so we might end on a very, very spicy question. We're not ones to shy away from the difficult questions, are we? This might be a Sarah question. The YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard movement is growing, which helps planning authorities push back against the NIMBY syndrome, which generates such conflict and inertia. Does the panel think the YIMBY movement might succeed in changing established community attitudes?
All right, I'm going to answer this in 1 minute. I think it's really dangerous to use terms like YIMBY, like we just should say yes to anything, and words like NIMBYs, like we shouldn't say no to things. I don't want to lose my heritage areas. Will it really, if my $2 million home in the inner city gets turned into $42 million apartments, is that actually going to provide more housing affordability? I think it's okay to ask questions. I think it's good that we're starting to say, yes, I do want things in my area, but they have to benefit us. They have to be affordable housing. They have to deliver the social infrastructure alongside. We can't just all be told we have to say yes to something that might not actually deliver any benefit for us. So I think YIMBY and NIMBY both have dangerous connotations, and that no area is the same, and it's better to open up really robust conversations with communities, provide them with the information they need to make decisions, and make those decisions on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks, Sarah. We have to balance everybody's needs, aren't we? Thank you, panelists, for joining us in this session and sharing your knowledge and ideas and experiences and expertise. I had a great time, and sorry we haven't been able to take all of your questions, but hopefully you've all taken away as much as I have from this conversation. If you've come to this webinar, you clearly know how to find one of us, but if you don't, then our website addresses are on this slide here, and thank you for joining us. And this will be recorded, and we'll share the link with all of you. And thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.